All right, now it is time for the top five segment, man. And this one is interesting. If you listened to last week's show, you should know what this week's top five is. This week, it is modern day films that we think will become classics, which was very freaking difficult to do. Like, I don't know about you, but man, oh man, like, I had to really do some research, and then I had to think about different genres, and then I had to think about what I felt like had the most rewatchability, if that's even a word. Well, it is now. But all of these different things. So yeah, this one was like maybe the most difficult that I've ever done.
Yeah, and it's I too tried to like, okay, let me pick different genres because I don't want to be stuck all in one kind of a thing or whatever. That was hard in itself. And then, I mean, this top five I think was so difficult because this is probably the top five that is basically our opinions. I mean, yeah, there's no fact base, there's no box office number there's no reasoning behind the picks other than this is our opinion. And so that made it even more difficult because it's like, how many people will agree or not agree with this? So these are going to be fun.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, number five for me goes to the one and only Let It Go, as in Frozen. I think this one is destined to be a classic further down the line because if you think about all the historical Disney movies, specifically in the last 20th century, I think it has the same love, the same admiration as like Lion King. Frozen and the Frozen franchise is huge. And so I definitely believe that further down the line, I'm going to be showing this to my children. And that's what played into it a lot too, you know, to be able to be like, okay, what movies am I going to be talking about 30 years from now that I can show to the young people if they don't know about it? And they might know about it. And so if they do know about it, they will definitely be considered classics. But I feel like Frozen, it has that connectability, it has all the great music, and it has the love story that ends up not being about, you know, typical romance. It's the love story about family and a sisterhood. Yeah. And to be able to have that bond that you don't necessarily need with an outside person. So yeah, I definitely think Frozen is on that list because I think it's historic, man. I think what they were able to do and the impact they were able to make with the younger generation of females specifically, I think will span from generations to come. So yeah, number five for me, Frozen, the original.
I mean, I'm right there with you. I think, yeah, as you guys know, last week on classics, already determined classics, I had Snow White. I think that, you know, every generation or so, Disney will make a film that will be a classic because it resonates. It's over generations of time. And I think that's definitely one of them. It sparks conversations all the time. I remember how there was this big controversy about whether Tarzan was their brother. You remember all that? That was just so crazy. But anytime that you can make a film that has that type of an interaction and that spawns those type of conversations, you're making a classic because somebody's always going to find it relevant and talk about it. My number five, nobody's talking about it because there's no talking. I picked number five for me, A Quiet Place. I think this one is destined to become a classic because every generation has a classic horror film. And this one is so uniquely different, right? And you guys know, if you listen to the show or if you listen to me on my social media and stuff, I am a hardcore dialogue guy. I love brilliant dialogue. I like films that can carry dialogue, and this is literally no talking. Yet this film had me riveted from start to finish. I was so locked in. I was so compelled by the script, by the acting, by the direction, everything about this film. And they did it without saying a word. And for me, that's an instant classic. I think this thing will wholeheartedly, I think people down the line, film critics, fans, everybody will agree and determine, bam, this is one. Strictly for that reason. To have a film completely so terrifying where there's really nothing, it's just face, it's expression. It's so brilliant. It's so brilliant. I remember everybody coming out of that theater going, holy shit. Like, because you can't help but marvel in the acting prowess of every single member of that cast, because it was all face. It was all just pure expression trying to convey what was happening in that film. And holy shit, it was just, yeah, A Quiet Place, destined to become a classic. Not just a horror classic, but a film classic overall. I think everything about it, master class in how to direct a film with no dialogue. Quiet Place.
Yeah, most definitely, man. Most definitely. Number 4 for me goes to Devil Wears Prada. Now, the reason I think this is destined to be a classic, because I think this specific film is my generation's Dirty Dancing, which, by the way, didn't age well, and I will go down always saying it didn't age well. But Devil Wears Prada, I feel like, is this generation's Dirty Dancing, and going to be a classic for all audiences across the world, because it shows you that, yes, maybe sometimes, especially at the beginning of adulthood, you feel like you're supposed to be checking all the boxes, right? You're supposed to be following people's orders, or even following people's footsteps. But then somewhere along the lines, as you're learning to be yourself and learning to be an adult, you're like, I don't need to do this anymore. You become your own best version of yourself. And I feel like what the script and what the characters and the actors were able to do in this film were show you that you don't have to be, you know, following in other people's footsteps. You don't have to be a reincarnation of your parents. You don't have to, follow the assembly line that was put forth in front of you. So I think that's very important for every generation, specifically when you're growing up in high school, to watch this film, to where you're like, okay, maybe at the beginning I am going to follow my P's and my Q's and stick very straight, but then it shows you that that's not the best way to do it. You have to try things. You have to go out and do things and live with different cultures, and to be able to move states, because how many people do we know just in our lives who live still where they grew up?
Yeah.
To be able to experience a little thing. There's not a problem with living where you grew up, but at least go spend time other places. Like, go to live in different states, go experience different cultures. And if you want to go home, go home. That's completely fine. That is your choice. But to be able to experience the different things, I feel like is so important, to where, you don't have to follow the mold. And I think that's the beautiful thing. So yeah, number 4 for me, Devil Wears Prada, because I think it's a great example of finding yourself and becoming who you are and who you want to be, and changing whenever you want, because it's your life. And at the end of the day, you're the only one who can decide what's right and what's wrong for your life.
Good. Yeah, it's so freaking hilarious, because it plays directly into my number 4 for the same reasons. My number 4 is a sequel to a classic, one that has been deemed a classic, Top Gun. And the whole storyline behind Top Gun is Maverick trying to get out of the shadow of his legendary father, who was a fighter pilot, and his Top Gun instructor flew with his dad. And it's about doing your own path and becoming a rebel, and trying to... He's basically had a troubled life because he's always been in the shadow of his father's legend, and he's trying to get out of it. Well, my number 4 is Top Gun Maverick, because it continues the storyline, and now it's Goose's son who is trying to get out of the shadow of Maverick and Goose, and trying to be his own man and start his own story and be who he's destined to be. And it's that same type thing. It's about, you don't have to live up to the expectations of your parents. You don't have to follow the same path as your parents. You are you, and you've got to do it your way. And I think that both the Top Gun movies, and specifically Top Gun Maverick, show that path, and show that it's not always easy, but it's the right thing to do, that you have to get out there, you have to experience it, you have to live your own life. And I think that it does it really well. And I also think it's destined to become a classic, because in my opinion, it's one of the rare times, because it doesn't happen very often, where the sequel capitalizes on all the magic of the original and expands on it and makes it a better film than the original. And in my opinion, Top Gun Maverick is better than the original, and I loved the original. It's a great film. And I was hesitant. I said, oh man, they're doing another one finally after all these years. I don't think this is going to be good. And then it was better than the original. So I think it's fair to say it has to be deemed a classic because the original is considered a classic. And how do you not do a film that's better than the original and make it a classic? So it's I like you. I like the storyline. I like what the message tries to tell about family and making your own path in life and doing what you got to do, and yet also capturing all of the magic and just expanding upon the universe of. And I'm fingers crossed they don't fuck it up with 3. Sometimes you go too far. Sometimes you never know. So sometimes, we'll see. We'll see.
But I agree. I think the sequel is better than the original. I think a lot of movies in the 80s, and I mean, I blame Terminator, but I feel like a lot of movies in the 80s were like looking for that one historical punchline, like I'll be back. Yeah, you can be my wingman anytime. Like, that type of thing. And I mean, not to take anything away from these great classic films, but I just feel like they lean too heavily on that. And then Top Gun Maverick, there's a beautiful story. But yeah, completely agree with everything you just said. Number 3 for me, and y'all just met me at a very strange time in my life. And I'm talking about Fight Club. Now, that movie is absolutely freaking wild. I mean, it's probably already deemed a classic. I'm not even going to lie. But, I mean, I had to throw it on there because it's one of my favorites of all time. Like, Brad Pitt and Edward Norton, to be able to talk about being schizophrenic and to be able to, multi-personality disorders, and like this stuff happens all the time, like, and not a lot of people talk about it, to where, like, people feel like they fall asleep and then a whole different person takes over to where they do different things, but then when the other person wakes up, they're in a completely different spot, different position. Like, they could even be in jail because some wild shit, maybe they blew up a whole building, kind of like Fight Club. But I feel like the way that they were able to, because I believe it was David Fincher, I think. But yeah, I think, what they were able to do in Fight Club was brilliant because, to basically start a whole cult while you're like in psychosis or whatever. Like, I mean, I feel like that was, just such a different type of storyline, and it makes you what am I doing when I'm asleep? Am I actually asleep? Am my body doing random things? Like, I don't know. It just makes you question a whole bunch of different things, specifically about your mental well-being, that I feel like it starts a conversation. And, we love films that start a conversation. But yeah, number 3 for me, Fight Club, because it's one of the all-time greats, to be honest. So,
without doubt. Without doubt. You're exactly right. It's one of the first films that I can remember that shone a huge spotlight on mental health. And you were, there's no way you weren't talking about mental health and schizophrenia after walking out of seeing that movie. You were. There was no way. It's one of those things that we always talk about, like you said, how to use your art to start a conversation about things that are uncomfortable. And that's how you do it. And it was brilliantly done. And I mean, come on, the performances in that film. I mean, it was so well done. I guarantee you the vast majority of that movie had no idea that it was a schizophrenic version of the same person. I guarantee you. It was just brilliant. And when you got the oh shit moment, you're like, what? I'm just so well done. And I mean, come on, how can any film that has Bitch Tit Bob not be a classic? That's all I'm saying. Meatloaf, man. You gotta love Meatloaf. God rest him. My number 3, I put this on here because, well, not because of the reasons you think. Not because I'm a huge Hugh Jackman fan. Not because I'm a huge Wolverine fan. Not because I'm a huge X-Men fan. Any of that stuff. I'm putting this one on it because I think James Mangold set the bar and said, guess what, boys and girls? You can make a film that's about a superhero that is not a superhero film. This was a flat-out drama film about family, about relationships, about falling on hard times, about overcoming those hard times. There was grit, there was despair, there was like so much. This was a full-on dramatic film about family. And it happened to be a superhero movie. It happened to have Wolverine in it. And the way he was able to pull that off was absolutely brilliant. And how it did not win an Oscar, I do not know. But it did set the bar for anybody who thinks that comic book movies are formulaic, or that superhero movies all fall into the same category, or that you can't have a real, I don't know, story or a real dialogue in these movies. Well, Mangold proved them all wrong with Logan. It was anything but a generic superhero movie. It wasn't full of all-on action. It had some, but it wasn't about blowing shit up or fighting the big baddie. The big baddie was their past, was dealing with coming to terms with who they were and where they came from and where they are now. And that was the big baddie. And I just thought it was brilliant. So anybody that goes back, if you're a film person, a cinephile, and you like story, and you like direction and cinematography and acting and all of the things that make a film great, Logan is a great film that I think people are going to look back on one day and go, yeah, that's a classic. That's a classic story being told. And my hope is that people down in future generations watch it and don't even realize that it's a comic book movie. I'm hoping that they just go, oh, what's this Logan thing with Hugh Jackman? And they watch it and go, oh, wow. And then, they're not familiar with that it's a superhero. That's my hope. And my number 3, Logan.
I love it, man. Completely agree. Completely agree. Well, number 2 for me goes to Coda. Oh, man. If y'all haven't seen Coda, where have you been? Won Best Picture a couple years ago at Apple TV Plus, and it really shows the story of, being the outsider in a family of disabled people, because everyone in her family is deaf, and she is the only able to hear person, not hearing impaired. So to be able to be a part of that, because that situation I feel like happens more often than people even realize. Like, to where everyone leans on her to be this specific person. And we all have that member in our family that we feel like is the rock, is the cornerstone that a lot of people put a lot of the pressure on. So it gives you a different perspective to think about, okay, maybe I need to alleviate some of this. Maybe I need to not put all this pressure on that one person. Or if that person is you, maybe you need to not let them put that pressure on you. It's those different type of things. And I feel like this film does an amazing job at that. Beautiful film. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Watch it at least once. And I think, as a filmmaker, this is going to be an instant classic for me, because I am going to be bringing this up all the time, and I am going to watch this film at least once a year. But yeah, number 2 for me is Coda.
I can't argue anything you just said. I agree with absolutely everything. It should be a classic. I hope it is a classic, and it's a brilliant film from start to finish. I think everything you said is spot on. My number 2, it's an Oscar contender this year. And it is my sincerest hope that it does become, down the line, many generations from now, a classic, because it deserves to be so. I am talking about The Holdovers. The Holdovers is a brilliant character study. It is a stark look at the human psyche and humanity and human life in general. The holdovers are basically all the black sheeps of their families, the black sheeps of the dynamic and of the society that they live in. And that's why they're the holdovers, because nobody really wanted them, or they had no real place to go during the holiday break of school. And while all of the characters, the professor, the cook, and the student, come from vastly different backgrounds and have very different reasons as to why they're the black sheep. You find in this character study as you're watching it that it does the perfect job of saying we're all so much more alike than we are different. And you don't know somebody's story until you talk, until you get to know them and find out where they come from and why they're the way they are. What have they been through? Where have they been? Where are they going? What are they trying to be? This movie does such a brilliant job of showing this in these characters. And you think no way these people are anywhere near each other, but by the end of the movie, they're like this, and they realize it's because there's so much more in common with each other, and their back lives are so much more intertwined than even they thought possible. And it's a really beautiful look at humanity. And I think it also does a very good job of saying, you know what? No matter what your story is, no matter where you've come from, no matter your current situation, you are good enough. It's okay to just be you. It doesn't matter if people look down upon you. It doesn't matter if people don't get your story or don't understand. It is okay to be you, and you are good enough. And I think this film does a brilliant job of saying that and showing that, and the performances are phenomenal. And that is why I think that The Holdovers will become a classic, because people are going to look back at it and go, that's life. And that's where we came from. And that I really believe it's going to be a classic.
For sure, man. For sure. Well, we're super excited about both of our number ones, and we'll try to get through them quickly. I know, like, they really coincide hand in hand.
They do.
Because, I mean, this past summer was absolutely a monster for the box office. And number one for me goes to Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie's Barbie. I think Barbie is going to be a classic in years to come because of the instant success that it had, because of obviously the popularity with the toys. And I feel like, it's a very woman empowerment film. And to be able to continue that positivity and able to continue lifting up women, lifting up other women is so important. Because, a lot of the stereotypes is women cut down other women. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the narrative needs to be changed on that. And I feel like this movie is a great step forward for that. So, yeah, number one for me, Barbie.
Well, there you go. And my number one is the second half of Barbenheimer, Oppenheimer. Listen, we've talked about this film every week in our industry news since it debuted, and it's now streaming on Peacock. I don't have a whole lot of things to say about this other than I have now put it at my list, the top of my list of all-time favorite movies. I think it is going to become many people's all-time favorite movie, surpassing The Godfather, surpassing so many others, Gone with the Wind and everything. This is a once-in-a-generation, 100-year, whatever you want to call, movie. It's brilliant filmmaking from top to bottom. It is a stark look at the reality of the world that we live in and where we came from, and unfortunately still are. It's a diagnosis and of craziness of where we live in, and it's brilliant. There's no reason that I can think of why this film would not become a classic. It is a master class in filmmaking and in storytelling. And it's true. It's history. It happened. Even more so why. It's one of those movies where you just have to go, holy shit. So my number one, Oppenheimer, it's the best film of all time, in my opinion. So of course I had to put it, it's going to be a classic. That's,
Well, and it's always a difference too between our favorite movies and then what we think are the best movies. So maybe one day we should have like a dueling list on that too. Best movies of all time and our favorite movies of all time. But yeah, I think Oppenheimer goes down with Titanic's, Godfather, Shawshank. All of these different ones that are amazing,
generational.
Yeah, exactly. But that is our top 5 this week, modern day films that we think will become classics. We want to know, what is your modern day film that you think will become a classic? because there's so many out there. I mean, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was in mine, the original, because I mean, classic as far as like animation style. And there's so many honorable mentions that I wish we had more time for. But man, oh man, please be sure to let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section and on X and on Threads at JLoganAustin and at CrazyAntCEO.
Yes.
All right.